Hi everybody. Here we go. Welcome to Paint Carry Paint. In this particular episode, I'm going to be painting in oils a portrait of my good friend Kelly. Kelly agreed to sit for today. So this portrait will be from life. It's what we call an alla-prima painting, which means alla-prima means painted in one session while the oil paints are still wet. So there's no dry paint in this particular way of painting. The oil paints stay wet and fluid all day long, which means they're malleable. Starting off with the same way I always do, same way I was trained to do, using a brown paint to establish the basic shapes. Now, oh, here we go. Okay, definitely sped up here. I don't actually paint this fast in real life. This is about a 6-hour painting day, and it's been sped up to about 15 minutes. But you can see here, using that brown paint, I'm beginning to establish my larger shapes, establish where the turn of the head, the basic structure of head, neck, and shoulders, starting to map out the darks or block in the darks, getting a sense of the smaller shape placements of the features, eyes, nose, etc. And here we go. Color study. This is the reason for our painting today. Color study is an exercise where we really try to explore the range of color at our disposal. Now, in order to do so, we have to sort of let drawing go a bit. We're not as worried about the drawing being perfect. If it doesn't even look like a person, that's okay. Because the point of color study is to explore the world of color, the color relationships, and the range of color that our palette is providing for us. Every palette has a little bit of a different system of relationships depending on what kind of palette you use. I will put a list down below of the colors on my palette. This painting was done from life, not a photo. So a couple of principles when it comes to color study and this type of exercise. The first one is, if you see a color, exaggerate it. Exaggerate the color. This will push you out of your normal comfort zone of seeing things in terms of grays or browns or neutrals, etc. It forces you to see everything as a hue. A hue meaning a color. So you exaggerate the hue. Everything is exaggerated. Again, this is an exercise. We're not necessarily trying to make a pretty painting. If we make a pretty painting, great. But if it doesn't come out pretty, that's okay. It's an exercise in expanding our color understanding, our color awareness. Now, to be honest, I do care about the drawing. I will try to keep my shapes in drawing as accurate as I can throughout the process. Also, my values will come in very helpful here. Keeping my lights and darks and my range of lights and darks as it pertains to where the light source is coming from, and modeling between lights and shadows, also very helpful. These drawing and values will keep the painting from teetering out of control. However, while I do those things and keep it under control, every shape I put down is a new opportunity to expand my color awareness, to try different color mixtures that perhaps I've never really tried before, to mix directly on the canvas and not on my palette. Because when you mix directly on your painting, things happen. You know, magic happens. Accidents happens. Sometimes those accidents are accidents. Sometimes those accidents are magic. But the only way to find out is to just let it rip and go for it. Sometimes it's mud. Sometimes it's awful. Sometimes it's brilliant. So you can see in the hair, as I'm blocking in the hair, trying to explore color variations, pushing the color, exaggerating the color notes I'm seeing from life, painting from life. Just a side note, painting from life is much different than painting from photos. The human eye's ability to see color is a very different type of machine than the camera. It's just they see differently. Which is always why it's better to paint from life whenever possible, because it will train your eye in a very different way, a more natural way than only painting from photos. I painted from life for 12 years before going back to working from photos. Another general principle of color study is every color shape you put down should be its own unique color and should not be repeated throughout the painting. Every color spot, color shape is its own and is different from every other color spot or shape on the painting. I'm not saying I achieved that here in this particular alla-prima painting. You know, I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I do want to make a nice painting. So I'm not pushing the color, exploration, experimentation and mixtures, etc. quite as liberally I might if I was thinking of this as a throwaway exercise, if that makes sense. I would call this a controlled color painting. I don't know if I'd call it a color study, but it's a very sort of color forward alla-prima portrait. I think that's fairly accurate. I try to get much of the painting blocked in as quickly as possible, which gives me a wet into wet surface to paint into. I always say and tell my students in classes that wet into wet is the most luxurious way to paint. You know, when you think of painters like John Singer Sargent, and painters like that, Sorolla, who really made this style of painting fashionable. Richard Schmid, Jenny Saville. So I'm going to keep pushing this painting forward here, getting into smaller and smaller shapes. Yes, trying to keep my drawing and values as under control and accurate as I can, and then using every color block as an opportunity to try something new with my color mixtures. I sort of know where the colors are going, I know my halftones, which is the tone in between the light and the shadow, tend to be kind of cool. So those color mixtures often incorporate Viridian, like a cool green. Sometimes they're a little bit more purple, like you see on the chin, where the light is turning from light to shadow. Sometimes a little more reddish, like you might see up on the cheek or the nose or in the ear, etc. So, I am kind of relying on some knowledge here. It's not pure abstraction. I am relying a bit on my memory and knowledge. So every plane change is a color change, and every color change is unique and should not be repeated again throughout the whole painting. which is a very different way to think about color relationships, because color is relative. We're not matching color. We are not trying to match color here. We're trying to perceive more color than we did before. That's why we exaggerate the colors we're seeing. Oftentimes, I was taught that if we paint the color relationships, which can be quite exaggerated, not always. It depends on your palette, what kind of palette you're using, whether it's a more prismatic palette or whether it's a more earth tone palette or limited palette. Your color explorations will be defined by your palette, how broad those relationships, the range is. So in this exercise, in that, because oftentimes people will say, well, don't you want to repeat the same color multiple times across the painting to create harmony? And I do think, of course, that is an aspect of image making, certainly, but that is not what we were trying to do here. Here, we're trying to do something a little different, which is we're trying to expand our color range and expand our color relationships as far out as possible, and our ability to perceive color differences as we expand out. This will increase our range of perception when it comes to color. When we use the same colors over and over again in a painting to create harmony, etc., I often think of that as more of a design tool. So if I wear an outfit out for the evening and I try to match the color of my socks with the pocket handkerchief in my coat, or my cufflinks, or something, or something that ties it all together, that ties, or in the way you do the interior decorating in your house. It's kind of a little more like that is what people are talking about, I imagine. This is not about design. This is about expanding our perception of color differences, the range of color, etc. While at the same time, I am trying to manage my drawing and shapes and anatomy, light and shadow, form modeling, etc. All in one day. This is how I spent one full day making this painting, Kelly, and practicing this type of way of seeing. You can see there's a lot of dark lights, half tones down in the chest, around the clavicle. I have a cool light source, so if I have cool lights, it means that my shadows are going to be warm, because lights and shadows are always opposite with regards to their temperature. So I'm going to have cool lights and warm shadows in general, so that's helpful. And you can see how the colors in the face are different than the colors in the lights down the neck. The neck being more yellowy and kind of greenish almost, cool. The face gets a little more pink. The lips get even more pink. The ear is kind of orangey and a little more yellow. A true color study doesn't mind if the painting itself ends up in the trash. That's a true color study. That's why this isn't quite a true color study, because I didn't want it to end up in the trash. I'm trying to make a painting here. A true color study is where you push the color, you explore, you don't care about the drawing. And if the painting ends up in the garbage, you're okay with that. You just start another one and then you do another one, and then you do another one, and then you do another one, and then you just go on, and the months start ticking by, and and the world is going by, and you're doing color studies in the studio. A few final strokes in real time here, and that's it. This was my attempt at a color study of Kelly, a 6-hour alla-prima wet into wet color forward painting, and it was a good day.